Hi, Joachim, or can you correct the way I pronounce your
Oh,
name?
that's all right, Federico. Thanks for meeting me. That's usually pronounced Joachim, at least in German.
Okay. Well, my German is very bad, so I will study more. But thank you so much for joining me for this interview.
You're welcome.
Uh, so today we are going to talk about developing plugins for Jetbrains. I think it's a very interesting topic. And first of all, it would be nice if you could tell us something about you.
All right. I think sure, I can do that. There's not too much to tell. I think so my name is Joachim. I'm living in the south of Germany, near the border to Switzerland and France. So right at the border. It's about 10 minutes to Switzerland and maybe about 20 to France. I'm 36 years old. I'm a software developer. I'm married. Yeah, and I think that's all I could tell. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions.
All right.
Okay, but first of all, I would like to ask you, how did you start developing plugins for JetBrains?
I think that was about 10 years ago. I think I had some time available about 10 years ago, and there was a yearly plugin developer contest at that time. So JetBrains was doing a yearly contest. I think I'm not sure how long they were doing that. That was the last year they were doing it. I think in 2009. So they were having some plugin development contest, and I think a grand prize of about I think $8,000 or something. So that was the reason to join, and I started to work on Bash support at that time. I think there was also another plugin I was working on for Erlang, for the Erlang language,
Oh, nice.
which I learned uh, by doing the development. I think the plugin was called Earl Grey at that time, but there's now much better
Okay.
Erlang plugin available on the repository, so that's out of date and not published anymore. But Bash support received the first prize of that contest,
Oh,
and
congratulations.
I was happy to win that prize, and I think that other plugin also I think had the third or fifth. I'm not sure, one of the lower ranks, but I was happy to be successful in that contest, and I think after that I continued to work on plugin development.
Okay, so we also now know that if you want to learn a programming language, you can always write a plugin for it. It's a good method, maybe. And but I wonder, what kind of plugins do you build more frequently? Do you build like editors for new languages, debuggers for existing languages, or uh,
Mm, Mostly, I think it's either language support or which includes the editor and other things like error highlighting, quick fixes, etc., or integration of third-party tools like, for example, to sync the current file the user's working on with a remote server. That's
okay?
a very small example of third-party integration, but I'm usually doing languages or third-party integration for other companies.
Okay. And I wonder who is typically interested in building plugins?
I think I think most of the open source community is interested to get plugins because
Okay.
there are a lot of frameworks out there which have quite lacking tool support. I think a lot of JavaScript frameworks or web frameworks or even languages like I think OCaml has come up recently
Oh,
is lacking quite tool support, or there's just very outdated or very basic tool support for these frameworks and languages. So I think there's some interest in the open source community, but also from I think companies doing commercial work. Um, they are mostly interested to integrate their product into the IntelliJ platform, I think,
right.
and often to get better tooling for their own programming languages if they offer some. And I think for one to do that for in-house development and also to support third-party developers working with their own custom languages.
Okay, good. And what advantages do people typically obtain by building plugins? And I don't know if you have any success story that comes to mind, or
I think it's a lot of the advantages for productivity, I think. So if you have only very basic tool support or lacking tool support, so no support at all, it's sometimes very hard to work with a framework or with a language. And as soon as you get some smarter some smarter tool support, it becomes much nicer and much better to work with that framework or language. So I think it's a lot. It's saving a lot of time if you get good tool support, and I think that's a good point to provide.
yeah, I definitely agree that tools are important, and I created a company that is named Strumenta. Instrumenta means tools in Latin, because I really think that tools can change the way someone works. Okay, and about your experience building plugins, I tried sometimes to take a look at Jetbrains documentation. I found quite difficult to get started, so I was wondering, how did you start developing plugins?
Yeah, I think it was a bit tough to get started. I think today there's much better documentation available. For example, linked from the plugin repository, there's a there's a developer handbook or SDK handbook, I think, to get started.
Okay.
I think that documentation is much improved to what was available 10 years ago when I started. So there was some documentation, there were some JetBrains forums available to ask a few questions, but it's mostly looking at the Java doc documentation in the source code and looking at the available open source plugins, mostly published by JetBrains or by some other parties. So I think looking at existing solutions has helped a lot to get started, but that was quite difficult and time consuming, I think.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so I guess this also answers my next question. So what advice you would have for someone that is interested in starting developing plugins? So there is this documentation, they can see the existing examples on GitHub.
Yeah, I think, that's a very good point to get started. I think it's the documentation published by JetBrains is a must read. So you have to read it to understand all the architecture of the SDK or of the IntelliJ platform and the different technologies involved and the wording, etc. You need to know about it, otherwise it becomes quite difficult to work on a plugin, because JetBrains has its own custom solutions for many things, like parsing is usually parsing uses data structures provided by JetBrains. I think there's some integration of third-party grammars or parser generators, but it's usually done using solutions provided by JetBrains. So I think it's essential to read the documentation, start with a small plugin, and I think it's very important to write test cases. I think that's no wisdom for for developer, but I try to cover everything I do with Bash support and the plugins I work on for clients to cover things by test cases, because it's, for one, difficult to support all the different versions of the platform. For example, to support version 2016.1 up to version 2018.3, or the current early access preview, is quite difficult. And if you want to make sure that it's not breaking on any of these different versions, then you need to have test cases which cover not just the basics, but also the workflow inside of the editor, code completions, etc. So
Yeah,
test cases is essential.
yeah, but I imagine that testing the editor itself has to be quite difficult or time consuming.
Mhm. I think it's very well done by JetBrains.
Okay,
They have some great support for to write test cases. That's usually done in the Java language, or nowadays you can also use Kotlin to do that.
nice.
I only use Kotlin for new projects because it's time saving and helping a lot. And JetBrains, because they invented Kotlin, provide great support for Kotlin as well. And I think it's possible to do nearly everything with except for UI, dialogues, etc. in test cases. So you can, there's basically an headless environment which runs your plugin inside of a full IDE setup. So you can basically open files, create new files, write into the editor, request code completions, check that code completions are matching what you expected, etc. So that's very sophisticated and I think quite advanced.
Nice, and I'm a big fan of Kotlin. I also created a website, superkotlin.com.
Okay,
I
cool.
think it's a very nice improvement over Java. So
It is. It is.
yeah. And okay, so you are very specialized on developing plugins for the JetBrains platform, but do you ever experience developing plugins for other platforms like Eclipse, Sublime, Atom, Visual Studio, or whatever
Mm.
else?
I had some rather bad experience before I started to work on JetBrains plugins with Eclipse. So
Okay.
I strongly disliked working on Eclipse plugins. I guess it has improved in the last years, but about 10 years ago it was just awful. Or maybe I didn't get it how it's done, but it wasn't very nice. The support provided by the JetBrains SDK was much better compared to what was available by Eclipse. I did not consider to work on other IDEs, mostly because I knew what I'm doing with the JetBrains platform and didn't want to learn a completely new platform without knowing whether that's worth it. I have some experience with another developer who's working on VS Code plugins and
Okay.
also on plugins for Atom. So I have some insights in what's possible and available. I think VS Code is gaining a lot of market share right now.
Yeah.
So perhaps I will have a look at VS Code plugins, but from what I learned, it's quite difficult to do the testing in VS Code. So it's not that advanced as what JetBrains is providing. And it's in JavaScript or possibly TypeScript, which I don't like that much. At least I don't like JavaScript that much because I prefer type-safe languages and
Right.
simple languages.
Yeah, no, I had some experience developing plugins for Eclipse because at the time I was using the Eclipse modeling framework. Yeah, it was very painful. Now, from time to time, I have a reminder of that time because someone comment on a bug I opened 7 years ago and no
Oh,
one solved, and say, okay, not really interested in this anymore.
mhm.
Okay, and so you say that you have been working on writing these plugins for 10 years. So I was wondering if you have noticed any change during this time, if I don't know, either on the technological level, so if the API changed a lot, or in the community, maybe the community becomes bigger or more friendly.
Mhm. I think it's quite larger changes in both of these areas. For one, I think that on the technological level, a lot of new features and possibilities were added to the SDK, but I'm glad that JetBrains managed to stabilize the SDK, at least in the important parts where I'm working on. For example, the uh, the parts which the parts around the custom language development are much more stable now compared to 10 years ago. So things were changing a lot and breaking things a lot about maybe 10 to 8 or 6 years ago, and
Okay.
that has improved quite a lot because they are now, I think, having more tooling in place to make sure that a change to the SDK is not breaking any of the existing plugins. I think they are scanning the jar files published on the repository to see if the plugins are using anything they want to deprecate or to remove. So that's much better, and I think they found a solution in the SDK which covers most or almost everything the plugins need to do the parsing and lexing, etc. So that's much better now. Things are breaking from time to time with the newer features or the UI integrations, but I still managed to publish a single version of a plugin for all the different versions of the platform. I'm doing that for the plugins developed for clients as much as possible, and I now started to do that again for Bash support. In the past, I had I think different versions of Bash support for each major version of the platform, which is quite painful to support. And yeah, I managed to support now 2016.1 and later with a single plugin file. That wasn't possible with the versions before because there were larger changes in the SDK. So that's much better, I think.
Good point. And okay, so it seems that JetBrains made your life easier over time.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And is there anything else that you think they should do to make your life easier, or the life of other people building plugins, of course?
Yeah, I think there are a few things they could improve. I think they are doing well, and they try to support plugin developers. I think a few things could be improved, like when a user uses Bash supports, I guess he's assuming that Bash support belongs into IntelliJ because it's suggested at startup, I think, to to PyCharm users to install Bash support, for example. And the users, I think, assume that it belongs to Jetbrains and report issues in Bash support to the utrack bug tracker on the Jetbrains servers. And then the guys from Jetbrains will tell the bug reporter to report at the issue tracker of Bash support. So I think there's some misunderstanding possibly, or I think it would help if JetBrains could provide accounts to plugin developers to be assigned to bugs users report on the public utrack issue tracker.
Oh, nice.
I think one of these smaller changes could help, and I think at some point JetBrains decided to tag the Bash support plugin featured by to tag it as featured by JetBrains, and I think that triggered a lot of more downloads, and it's a bit difficult to support that strong user base without strong support from JetBrains. I think so. I think things could be improved a bit. Let me just have a quick look at my notes. I think. One point I noticed is in the past I was working on an integration of a JavaScript dialect or JavaScript-like language into IntelliJ, and that involved to dig into the JavaScript plugin, which is not open source, to see what they provide and which extension points are possible to use in the third-party plugin, which extends the JavaScript support in the IDE. And this is quite painful to do because there's an XML file in each plugin which lists which possible extension points are available. I can use those, but I have to decompile the code to see what the plugin is doing with these extension points, and there's no documentation, etc. But they somehow provide these extension points, and I think they have some in-house documentation available for these plugins which are not open source, but I don't have access to that, and it's very hard to do that without support from JetBrains, for example.
Yeah, can imagine. And no, regarding Bash support, it seems like from the marketing point of view, it's good that they are in a way promoting it, but on the other end, if people don't realize they are not the one building Bash support, in a way, it seems like they are taking the credit. Not on purpose, but yeah, on
Yeah, in a way. I think it's good to highlight the plugins which are useful to developers. I think most of the developers most of the users of Bash support are using PyCharm. So I think it's good to highlight the plugins useful to the people using the different editions of the IDEs. Of course, Jetbrains is somehow profiting from Bash support in this case because they don't have to write it themselves. But I think on the other hand, it's putting some more pressure on me or on my end because I need to support that growing user base, which is a bit difficult from time to time. But I think it's a good move of JetBrains to support the plugins by highlighting them or by supporting them. But I think there's possibly some lacking support to handle that higher workload, for example.
Yeah. But when a new version of PyCharm, for example, is released, and you need to make sure that Bash support it, is it a lot of work or?
It tended to be a lot of work a couple of years ago, but now I think it's usually a few fixes here and there to do this. So JetBrains is publishing these EAP versions, so these early access previews are available before the public release is made. So I have some time to test the plugin with the latest or with the upcoming version. Usually, the users of Bash support are quicker to mention that there's a new preview release available to test than I am able to look at this. But that's just fine. That's just is showing that Bash support is in use, which is good. But with the current new versions of the platform, there's usually just a fix here and there. For example, if a deprecated method was removed from some class, I need to work around this, usually by reflection, to make sure that it's working with older versions and the newer version, for example. Or to remove some override keyword from my implementations because I'm compiling with the lowest version of the SDK, and I also build with the new versions in an automated way, so I need to remove some annotations here and there, for example, to make it compile with the newer versions when a method in the superclass was removed, for example, but that's manageable.
Okay, good. And so, well, we already named one of your projects, but if I'm not mistaken, you have two open source plugins. It's Bash support and Smart Editor, at least two major ones. Maybe you have more smaller ones. But can you talk a little bit about these projects, please?
Sure. I think I already mentioned a few things about Bash support. Smarter Editor is another plugin with a much smaller user base. I wrote that plugin to basically help me to work faster with IntelliJ when I'm working with the keyboard. I usually prefer to use keyboard only or the mouse as few times as possible. So Smarter Editor helps to work with the keyboard by simplifying selections or moving things around, etc. So that's has a much smaller user base and it's usually not problematic at all because there's usually no issue reported at GitHub. And the people who use it, who know it, seem to be happy with it, and I don't see any necessity to improve it. But Bash support is different in that case because it has a much wider user base. It's still lacking a lot of things like a debugger or like proper formatting, etc. So sometimes I wonder why people use it because it's lacking a lot of things which are necessary to have for full support for Bash scripting, but I think it's much better than what's available outside of IntelliJ. I would like to work more on this, but time is short, and it's difficult to handle this.
Yeah, no, it's
that's basically that's another plugin now which I'm working on, which is open source, which is for a plugin for the Tezos platform.
oh,
So that's the Tezos platform is basically an a competitor of the of a blockchain. So it's basically an improved version of the Bitcoin blockchain, or a much smarter version of that. So I'm writing currently a plugin to support the Michelson programming language to write smart contracts for the Tezos platform or for the Tezos blockchain, which is that's fun. So that's supported by the Tezos Foundation to do this, and I'm happy to work on this, which is it's cool to work on this.
yeah, and I mean, I write domain-specific languages for a living, so sometimes I wonder if for writing smart contracts would be possible to provide higher level languages that were maybe simpler for users. But
I think there are already some languages available which are doing this. I think for the Tezos platform, it's, for example, a language called Liquidity. I think it's based on OCaml. I think it's Liquidity based on OCaml, which basically is translated into Michelson and which is then executed on the blockchain. Michelson is a very basic, very low-level language, which basically has a stack of values and operations to work with the stack. But it's quite low level, and things like Liquidity, and I think there's another upcoming language for the Tezos platform, are simplifying this a lot to work with it.
okay, I will take a look at Liquidity and see how it is. And but okay, so you are building this open source project, but you're also doing consulting work. So I wonder if this open source project help you to land some clients or in any other ways help your business.
I see. I think it helped for sure. Bash support is paying off well. Smarter Editor is not contributing to this, but Bash support is doing well in this regard. I think because Bash support is currently in the top 10 or top 3 plugins of the most downloaded plugins ever, it's quite prominent on the plugin repository, so it's easy for people to find it. Basically, my self-employment started with Bash support because my first client noticed Bash support and was looking for a developer doing JetBrains plugins. So that's the way he found me and approached me to work on a project for him. So that paid off very well.
Nice. Okay, we talked about a little bit already on how it's difficult to maintain these plugins. I mean, the difficulty of dealing with new releases. But I was wondering if you receive many bug reports or if you receive contributions from other people in the project, or.
I see a lot more bug reports than contributions. I think there were. I think in the last. There are some more pull requests and contributions to Bash support in the last few months, but before that there were maybe 2 or 3 in the last 10 years. So
Okay.
it seems to be a very limited thing to work on JetBrains plugins. I think more and more developers are doing this, but Bash support is a bit nasty because it has its own handwritten parser, because there were no parser generators back when I started, and Bash is just awful. So Bash is a very awful language to parse because it's just it's very hard to do this right because it says that these many different, very complex structures or expressions, and very, for example, the pattern match, the parameter expansion is very difficult to pass well if you want to retain all the variable references, etc., and regular expressions and keywords meaning different things in different places. So it's case sensitive. That's quite bad to do this right. And I think I'd have to rewrite the parser and the lexer to make this faster and improve the experience, but that's not possible with the time available.
Yeah.
So it's a bit hard to work on bash support for other developers. There are many things which are not directly related to the parsing and lexing, where it's more easily to work on this. But yeah, I think many people use it, but are not Java developers themselves to work on it. There's some new developer on the team of bash support, Alexander Nosov. He's doing a great job to provide fixes and pull requests for bash support. I'm happy for that, and he's doing well. So I'm happy that there's someone else on the team, but it's a bit hard to manage about 500,000 users with the time available. But yeah, it's manageable. But sometimes I wonder why people are still using it, because I'm not that quick to fix issues compared to in the speed they are reported.
Yeah, no, I realize that it's very difficult to maintain successful open source project. Much easier to maintain unsuccessful projects. No one complains.
That's
no
correct.
One. So that's for our readers. Don't make your open source project successful, or it's becomes very tough.
I think find a good way to pay for it. I think that's good. In a way, bash support is paying well, because at one point before my wedding, I asked for I had a little gift campaign inside of bash support to ask users if they wanted to contribute something to my wedding, and that paid off very well. So I'm very happy for my users that they are very generous to contribute to my wedding, and basically paid off my wedding in full. So that was very well. But at that point, I promised that I will not raise any money with bash support again. So I'm not doing that, and in the long run, it's a bit difficult to do that with a free time available. But I think maybe I will find another way. Maybe ask Jetbrains or someone else to provide some developer or some support to work on the plugin. But for now, it's difficult. But if you do your own plugin and it becomes successful, then find a good way to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe writing some short book or a video course and ask for a free offer. We do that for Java parser. It's not like we are getting rich with this, or anything, or not even. But yeah, maybe, who knows? You have more users than Java parser, I think so.
But users. I couldn't write a book to how to work with bash support. Maybe I could write a book how to work with IntelliJ, but I think there's a few books available on that. But I think it's very difficult to do a successful open source project and to make a living with it. I think many people are trying with a subscription model for server-based software, etc. But I think it's still very difficult to do this.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we have talked about your open source work. Now I would like to talk more about your consulting work. So, what kind of project do you like the most working on?
I like the most the projects where there's some gain in productivity, or which is helpful for the client. Okay. So a project which helps the client to work faster, to improve productivity inside of the company, or for the developers using the product of the client. I think I like that quite a lot, because that makes me feel good to provide value to clients and developers. And on the other side, I prefer to work on projects which help me to learn new things. Like that project for the Tezos platform, I learn a lot about the blockchain or the smart contract language, etc. So I like these kind of projects as well because I learn a lot about new things this way.
Okay. Yeah, but regarding productivity, I think that it's crazy how much the value that someone provide when it increase productivity by even by 10%. I mean, considering the cost of employees, a company it can increase productivity by buying a plugins can really save an incredible amount of money. So
I think so, yeah. But you somehow have to get that message to the person buying these plugins at the companies. I think these are usually different people, the people who gain productivity and the people who have to buy it.
right.
I think it's a good. Yeah, I still have to find a good way to sell this, but I think the gain in productivity, if it happens with a plugin, is very helpful for that company.
Yeah, maybe we need to share more success stories and present them in a way that it's easy to see the advantage. Yeah, maybe. Okay, and how do you typically start a project? How people approach you, or what is the typical way to get in contact with you and get started?
I see. That's usually, I think, in a very simple way. I have a website, and usually people, I think, check out the website and then get in touch with the contact form or by email. And after that, I try to keep it simple. For example, to not over-define or over-specify things in advance, but just I think it starts usually with a quick call to see what the client needs, and there's a way to do this in IntelliJ. And after that, I try to continue to keep it simple. For example, by releasing plugins early, because a plugin usually consists of many small, mostly independent parts, and it's possible to just work on a smaller feature, publish it, let the developers of the client use it, and then get some feedback to provide further features in the areas I was working on, or to work on other upcoming features. So some iterative development work is preferred, but I think that's mostly also useful for the clients as well, because they will get some quick feedback and they will quickly see if the plugin is working out for them or not. But I think the work or the communication with the client itself, I try to keep it simple and maybe call once a week to talk about the current questions about the upcoming features or developments. But I think that probably also highly depends on the company itself. If it's a smaller, more uncomplicated company, I think then my current approach is working well. If it's a much larger company, which hasn't happened yet for me, then it needs to change, I think. But for now, it's working out this way.
Yeah, so this leads to my next question. So who is your ideal client? It's a large company, a small company, a company working in a certain field? Do you have seen some characteristics that make you work better with the company? Or
I think currently I'm not limited to any specific field of expertise or any department. I'm happy to work with companies from all different kinds of work, but my ideal client would be some medium-sized or smaller-sized company, but which is still able to provide the compensation for the work necessary to do for a good plugin. I think there's some difference in a basically working plugin or in a smart plugin which really enhances productivity, and that needs some budget, but I think that's still manageable for a smaller or medium-sized company if they see the value of this. I think it would be a bit more difficult to work with a very large company where things are more need to be in order in a certain way to make projects with third-party developers or third-party freelancers work. But I think a medium to smaller size company which likes IntelliJ and which is looking for some reward in productivity or tooling support is best.
Yeah, no, I also agree. Also for me, it's the medium-sized company. It's nice also because you can really see the effect of your work on the company. You can have a significant impact on the company. Well, it's
that's a good point.
difficult to change a super giant company. Not going to change the life of Amazon or anything in the near future. Okay. So I think that also many of our readers are interested in freelancing, considering it. So I am curious of your experience. So how did you start going into freelancing?
I think basically it started with my first client who approached me and asked me to work on a integration of his software into IntelliJ. At that time I was still employed, but I was working remotely because I moved to southern Germany a few months before that. So I was basically looking for something else, and that turned out to be a good opportunity to start working as a freelancer or to be self-employed. So it started with that, and I'm trying to find my way into consulting about plugin development. I'm still trying to find my way, but I think it's good to have a client at first which is looking for some midterm or long-term contracting.
Yeah, definitely, and it also makes clear that there is the need for this kind of service. So I think it's a very good thing to start with a client.
Yeah, I think so. I probably wouldn't have decided to become self-employed if this first client wasn't looking for a developer working on a plugin. I think it's much more difficult to start without any client at all.
Okay, and but why did you decide to specialize in plugin development?
It's a good question. I think for one, because it's something I like to do, and I think I'm good at this. At least I think so. There are many other people good at this or better at this, but it still seems to be some niche on the market where not many freelancers or consultants are offering their services. And I think I know what I'm doing in this area, and I just like to do it because it's fun and it's not getting on my nerves like JavaScript web development or something, which is just basically whenever I do it, it's just awful. But doing plugin development is a good way to work, I think. And yeah, I like it to create software which is smart and helpful. And so I decided to do what I'm good at. But I think I'm not limited to plugin development, but just offering very generic services on my website wouldn't work out. So yeah. I'm trying to find my way here.
I think that normally developers are very scared of specializing because they like to think they're able to do everything, but I think that instead specializing from the point of view of the client gives you more clarity on what you are very good at. It means that you have a lot of experience in that kind of project, so probably give you best result than a Java developer just trying to write a plugin, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I think if a client contacts me to work on a plugin, I'm able to provide much quicker results and better results compared to a Java developer who needs to find his way into development of IntelliJ plugins. I think in the end he will deliver the same results, but he will take a lot longer to do this. So I think for a client, it's it's helpful to know that I'm good at what I'm doing. Of course, I can do a lot more than just to write plugins for IntelliJ, but that's currently not what I'm offering on my website. But for example, for a client, I'm doing development in Golang for backend services or desktop software which runs in the background, which is headless. So that's fun as well, but that's not what I'm offering at first.
Right. And do you have any advice that you would like to share with other freelancers?
I'm not that long in business to have gained a lot of wisdom in this regard, but I think one point which is very helpful, at least to me, is to know that I'm planning to work on the things I'm doing for a very long time, like 2 decades or 3 decades. So that's a very long time. In that time, I need to stay fit and healthy. So I think to have to know about this and to plan to work on this long term means to have good hardware, like ergonomic hardware, and to have a good seat and a good desk, because you can just ruin your back and everything else if you don't care for this. So I think it's not directly related to self-employment or freelancing or software development, but I think when you're sitting 10 hours or 8 hours for 10 years or 20 years at your desk, you need to care about this to be able to continue to do that.
Yeah, so probably I should change my cheap IKEA chair. I will ask you later.
It doesn't mean that it's bad. It just needs to support you and to help you. I think I'm probably a bit concerned about this because I usually have some troubles with my wrists, but that's turned out to be related to the keyboard I was using, and with an ergonomic keyboard, I'm doing much better than with a traditional size or formed keyboard.
Yeah,
I think a simple change can help a lot.
Yeah, me too. I have how it's called, the natural keyboard from Microsoft, and I like it.
Yeah, I think it's a good one.
Okay, so we are now going to the last set of questions, and I was wondering if there was something that you have been recently interested into, something new that people could want to hear about.
Not something really interesting. Personally, I'm doing now a lot of work in Kotlin. So
Good.
I'm moving from Java to Kotlin mostly, or from the Java language to the Kotlin language. I like it quite a lot. I try to do some web development with that, to have type-safe development for JavaScript, etc., to do the multi-platform thing they are offering, but that's still in the early stages, I think, but they are making progress. But so I like Kotlin quite a lot, and I can fully recommend it, because and you need to just write half of what you're writing for Java and get the same or even better results. So that's highly recommended.
Good. I totally agree with that. Okay, is there anything else I forgot to ask that you would like to add?
I don't think so. I'm trying to find a way to have something else in addition to plugin development. Currently, I'm working on a personal side project to do something similar to Rollbar or Sentry, which is error tracking in software.
Okay.
So basically, I'm suffering from the not invented here syndrome. But I decided to do some personal project to learn about new technologies, for example, Kotlin, and new up-to-date web development, etc., and to write server software in Kotlin. So I think I'm using it to learn new things, which is very helpful for me, because I usually don't learn by reading alone. But I need to do both to be good at it. And I'm trying to use this error tracking software in Bash support at some point, because currently I'm using emails send from a remote endpoint to send these errors over to my side. I don't want to use any third-party software, which is hosted on the cloud for this. But yeah, I'm still trying to find my way into this. Maybe I will offer some hosted solution at some point, but maybe it's just staying a personal project. It's open source. It's called Logrally, but it's still in the very early stages, and currently it's still something I'm working on to learn about new things.
Okay, so we will add the link, and if later you keep working on it, we will have another interview on this.
Okay.
And so how can readers find more about you and your work?
Basically by looking at my website. So I have a website related to the plugin development I'm offering, which is at plugin-dev.com. And I have a personal website at ja-dev.eu, which is basically my first and last name initials. I can send you the links later on.
Sure,
but
we'll add them.
Thanks. It's best to just look at the website to see what I'm offering and to get in touch by using the contact form or to write an email, for example.
So for clients that are interested in working with you, they should just use the contact form?
I think so, yeah. I think it's best to just use the contact form, or if you prefer, just write an email. My contact details are on my website. If you like, you can also call me. My phone number is on the website as well. So feel free to do that.
I never put my phone number. Just recruiters are just able to find it. I don't know how, but
yeah, I think up to now I did not have many bad experiences with the phone number, but I think I have it on my website. I'm currently not totally sure. I think I do.
Because sometimes I worry that people are not aware of the fact that exist time zones, so maybe someone call you in the middle of the night. So sorry, it's morning for me.
That's right. Yeah, but I'm able to turn my phone off at night if I want to. So
that's also smart. Okay, that was my last question. So thank you very, very much for spending this time with us and be so open about your experience. I think will help our readers.
Thank you, Federico. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, bye.